My heart didn't just break. It felt like it was physically ripped from my chest, dripping and raw, right there on the polished hardwood of the pack hall. The entire Silver Pines pack was watching. My mate, the man I had loved in secret for 3 years, was standing on the ceremonial dais, holding the hand of another woman. The words of rejection had just left his lips, hanging in the dead silence of the room. I was supposed to drop to my knees. I was supposed to fade away, a wolfless, broken girl. But as the agony threatened to consume me, a dormant, terrifying heat ignited in my blood. Just wake up, she exploded to the surface, and the ceremony was about to come to a grinding, violent halt. The Silver Pines pack, nestled deep in the unforgiving, emerald forests of Oregon, was a community built on strength, tradition, and lineage. If you didn't have a wolf by your 18th birthday, you were pitied. If you didn't have one by your 20th, you were a ghost. I was 21. My name is Madeline Foster. For the last 3 years, I had been the pack's most pathetic cautionary tale. Late bloomer was the polite term whispered by the elders. Wolfless runt was the preferred nomenclature of everyone else. I was the daughter of 2 respected warriors who had died in a border skirmish when I was 10. I had the pedigree, I had the training, but my inner wolf was utterly, frustratingly silent. No voices in my head, no heightened senses, no bone-breaking shifts beneath the full moon. Just me, painfully human in a world of monsters and magic. But I had a secret that kept me going, a desperate, foolish hope that anchored me to the pack when I should have left to live among humans. His name was Caleb Harrington. Caleb was the newly appointed alpha of Silver Pines. He was 23, built like a towering oak tree, with piercing steel-gray eyes and a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. We had grown up together, thick as thieves, before the hierarchy of our teenage years pulled us apart. But on my 18th birthday, the night I failed to shift, something had happened. We had brushed hands at the celebration bonfire, and the mate bond had sparked. It wasn't a full inferno, because my wolf was asleep, but the golden, electrifying tether of the goddess's design had tethered my soul to his. He felt it too. I saw the shock, the undeniable recognition in his eyes. But instead of claiming me, Caleb had pulled me into the shadows of the pine trees and whispered words that became my gospel. "We can't, Maddie. Not yet. My father is stepping down soon. The pack won't accept a Luna who hasn't shifted. Keep it quiet. Wait for your wolf. I'll wait for you." So, I waited. For 3 grueling years, I endured the whispers, the mocking shoulder bumps in the pack house corridors, the pitying looks from my Aunt Bridget, who had taken me in. I watched from the sidelines as Caleb ascended to the alpha position. I watched him grow colder, harder, shaped by the brutal politics of pack leadership. And lately, I had been watching him spend an awful lot of time with Victoria Sinclair. Victoria was everything I wasn't. She shifted at 16 into a sleek, auburn wolf. She was the daughter of the beta, relentlessly ambitious, gorgeous, and absolutely ruthless. Whenever she looked at me, her lips curled into a sneer that promised violence if I ever stepped out of line. Rumors were swirling that Caleb was going to announce his Luna at the annual mating gala. "You're torturing yourself, Maddie," Leo Gallagher sighed, leaning against the doorframe of my bedroom. Leo was my best friend, a scruffy, easygoing Delta wolf who treated me like a sister. He was watching me stare blankly at the dress hanging on my closet door, a simple, elegant midnight blue gown Aunt Bridget had bought for me. "I have to go, Leo," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's the mating gala. Attendance is mandatory for unwed pack members. Caleb hasn't spoken to you in 2 months," Leo pointed out gently, stepping into the room and crossing his arms. "And when he does, it's official pack business. He looks right through you. Everyone sees it. He's the alpha," I defended, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "He has to maintain appearances. He told me to wait." Leo rubbed the back of his neck, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Maddie, there are things being said about Caleb and Victoria. The beta was bragging at the training grounds today that his daughter is about to become the most powerful woman in the territory." A cold spike of dread drove itself into my stomach, but I stubbornly pushed it down. "Gossip. You know how the Sinclairs are. They're just trying to force Caleb's hand. Just guard your heart tonight, okay?" Leo said softly, stepping forward to squeeze my shoulder. "If things go south, I've got the truck gassed up. We can leave. Go to the city, get some awful diner food, and forget these elitist jerks." I offered him a tight, unconvincing smile. "Thanks, Leo. but it'll be fine. Tonight is a full moon. I can feel something. I swear I can. Maybe tonight is the night. It was a lie. I felt nothing but the hollow, terrifying emptiness in my chest. But as I dressed for the gala, carefully applying my makeup and stepping into the blue gown, I clung to the memories of Caleb's promise. I'll wait for you. The pack hall was a massive, rustic chic lodge situated at the center of our territory. When I arrived with Aunt Bridget, the place was already pulsating with energy. Hundreds of wolves were packed into the cavernous room, dressed in their finest. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the polished hardwood floors. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive perfumes, and the underlying heavy musk of werewolf pheromones. I stayed near the edges of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water, my eyes tracking the crowd until they found him. Caleb stood near the grand staircase, holding court with the pack elders. He looked breathtaking in a tailored black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. My chest tightened, the dormant, one-sided bond pulling at me, urging me to cross the room and press my face into his neck, to breathe in his intoxicating scent of rain and cedarwood. Then, my heart plummeted. Victoria Sinclair slinked up to his side, wearing a blood-red dress that left very little to the imagination. She placed a manicured hand flat against Caleb's chest, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. To my absolute horror, Caleb didn't pull away. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that carried over the ambient noise, and placed his hand over hers. "Don't look," a voice murmured beside me. Aunt Bridget slipped her arm through mine. "He's playing politics, Madeline. An alpha must keep his beta happy." "It doesn't look like politics," I choked out, tearing my eyes away. Suddenly, the heavy strike of a crystal glass being tapped echoed through the hall. The room fell into an immediate, reverent silence. Caleb had stepped up onto the raised dais at the back of the hall, the microphone stand glinting in the light. Beside him stood the pack shaman, ready to bless any new unions. "Welcome, my pack," Caleb's voice boomed, deep and authoritative, sending shivers down my spine. "Tonight, under the light of the full moon, we celebrate the strength of our bonds. We celebrate the future of Silver Pines." He paused, his steely gaze sweeping over the crowd. For a fraction of a second, his eyes locked onto mine. My breath hitched. This was it. He was going to explain. He was going to claim me, wolfless or not, and prove to everyone that the moon goddess made no mistakes. "A pack is only as strong as its leadership," Caleb continued, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "And an alpha is only as strong as his Luna. For months, I have deliberated on what is best for the future of our people. We face threats from the rogue factions to the north. We need stability. We need power. We need a Luna who embodies the fierce, unyielding spirit of the wolf." My stomach began to churn. A Luna who embodies the spirit of the wolf. Caleb extended his hand toward the steps of the dais. "Victoria, come forward." The applause that erupted in the hall sounded like roaring static in my ears. The world tilted violently on its axis. Victoria Sinclair ascended the steps. A triumphant, predatory smile painted across her face. She took Caleb's hand, stepping up beside him to face the cheering pack. No. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt impossibly thick, suffocating me. I took a step back, bumping into someone behind me, but I didn't even turn to apologize. My eyes were glued to the dais, praying this was some sort of cruel test, a misunderstanding. Caleb raised a hand, and the applause died down. He looked out at the crowd, and then, his eyes found me again. This time, there was no warmth, no secret promise. His gaze was glacial, stripped of any affection or history we shared. "Before the shaman binds us," Caleb said, his voice dropping into a colder, more formal register, "there is a matter of pack business that must be concluded, a matter of the goddess's will, and the alpha's right to choose the destiny of his pack." He stared directly at me, and the crowd, sensing the shift in his attention, began to turn. Hundreds of pairs of eyes followed his gaze, landing on me as I stood trembling near the refreshment tables. Whispers broke out, a malicious rustling sound that filled the room. "Madeline Foster, step forward," Caleb commanded. It wasn't a request, it was an alpha command. The supernatural weight of it hit me like a physical blow, forcing my legs to move against my will. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving a wide, terrifyingly empty aisle for me to walk down. I felt Leo try to grab my arm, to stop me, but the command was absolute. I walked forward, my vision blurring with unshed tears, until I stood at the base of the dais, looking up at the man who had promised me the world. "Caleb," I whispered, my voice trembling so violently I barely recognized it. "Please, what are you doing?" He didn't flinch. Victoria, standing beside him, looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The moon goddess, in her infinite wisdom, pairs souls to balance one another. Caleb addressed the hall, speaking over me as if I were nothing but a prop. 3 years ago, a bond sparked between myself and Madeline, but the goddess also gives us free will. She gives us the responsibility to protect our people above our own desires. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The rumors of our bond had always been just that, rumors. To have the Alpha admit it openly was a shock to the pack. "I have waited," Caleb continued, his tone turning accusatory. "I have waited for 3 years for her wolf to awaken, for her to prove herself worthy of standing by my side. But she remains broken, human, weak." The words struck me like physical lashes. I gasped, wrapping my arms around my stomach. "You promised," I sobbed, no longer caring about my dignity. "You said you would wait." "I waited long enough," Caleb snapped, a terrifying growl underscoring his words. "Silver Pines cannot be led by a cripple. We cannot project weakness to our enemies. A true Alpha does not let a mistake of fate ruin his pack." He stepped to the very edge of the dais, looking down at me. The bond between us, that fragile golden thread that I had nurtured in my heart for years, suddenly became suffocatingly tight. "I, Caleb Harrington, Alpha of the Silver Pines pack," he boomed, his voice resonating with ancient, ritualistic magic, "do hereby reject you, Madeline Foster, as my destined mate and Luna." The moment the words left his mouth, an agony unlike anything I had ever comprehended tore through my body. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a violent, spiritual severing. It felt as though a serrated blade had been plunged into my chest and dragged downward, carving out my organs. I screamed. It was a harrowing, guttural sound that echoed off the rafters. I collapsed to the hardwood floor, my knees slamming into the wood so hard they bruised instantly. I curled into a ball, clutching my chest, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Blood rushed to my ears, and my vision swam with dark, terrifying spots. "Madeline!" Leo's voice yelled from somewhere in the crowd, but the Alpha guards blocked his path, keeping him away from the ceremonial space. "It is done," Caleb announced, his voice totally devoid of emotion. He turned his back on my writhing form. "The weak tie is severed. Now, shaman, proceed with the claiming ceremony for my chosen Luna, Victoria." The cruelty of it was absolute. He wasn't even going to let me leave the room. He was going to mark another woman while I lay bleeding out spiritually at his feet. "Oh, look at the pathetic runt," Victoria mocked, her voice carrying over the silent, staring crowd. "Can't even take a rejection like a real wolf. Someone drag her out before she soils the floor." I lay there, the cold hardwood pressing against my tear-stained cheek. The pain in my chest was blinding, a dark void expanding, threatening to swallow my consciousness. This was how rejected wolves died. The shock to the system, especially for an unawakened wolf, was usually fatal. I could feel my heartbeat slowing, the rhythm becoming erratic. Let go. A dark, whispering thought echoed in my fading mind. Just let go. "It hurts too much." Caleb leaned down, his fangs elongating as he prepared to bite the crook of Victoria's neck, sealing the mating mark in front of the pack. The shaman began chanting the ancient rites, but as the darkness rushed in to claim me, it hit something deep within the abyss of my soul. It didn't find emptiness. It found a wall of absolute furious fire. The pain in my chest suddenly changed. The cold, suffocating void of the broken bond was violently incinerated by an explosive, blinding heat. It started in my core, a swirling vortex of pure, unadulterated magma that shot through my veins, incinerating the despair and replacing it with something ancient, feral, and thoroughly enraged. My heartbeat, which had been fading into nothingness, suddenly hammered against my ribs with the force of a battering ram. Thump, thump, thump. It was so loud I thought the entire hall could hear it. "Mine," a voice echoed in my mind. It wasn't Caleb. It wasn't my own internal monologue. It was a voice that sounded like grinding tectonic plates and howling winter winds. It was distinctly female, ancient, and dripping with murderous intent. He dared to break what was ours. He dared to call us weak. Another scream ripped from my throat, But this time, it wasn't a human scream of agony. It was a guttural, terrifying half-roar that vibrated the very floorboards beneath me. On the dais, Caleb froze, his fangs inches from Victoria's neck. The shaman stopped chanting. The entire hall went dead silent, the collective breath of hundreds of wolves catching in their throats. My spine arched violently, lifting my torso off the ground. The sound of bones cracking and shifting echoed like gunshots in the quiet hall. It was supposed to be agonizing, the first shift. It was supposed to tear muscles and rip skin, but the fire inside me numbed the pain, turning the structural demolition of my human body into a euphoric release. What is happening? Victoria stammered, backing away from the edge of the dais. Get her out of here! Caleb roared to his guards, his eyes wide with a sudden, unexplainable panic. Get the runt out! 2 massive alpha guards rushed forward, reaching down to grab my arms, but as their hands made contact with my skin, a shockwave of kinetic energy blasted out from my body. The guards were thrown backward, flying 10 feet through the air before crashing violently into the refreshment tables, shattering glass and sending food flying. Screams erupted from the crowd. People scrambled backward, pushing each other to get away from the epicenter of the blast. I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. The midnight blue dress tore to shreds as my muscles expanded, rapidly thickening with supernatural mass. My fingernails elongated into jagged obsidian claws that gouged deep into the polished hardwood floor. Fur erupted from my skin, not the typical brown or gray of the Silver Pines wolves, but a coat of pure, iridescent silver so bright it almost seemed to glow, tipped with shadows of pitch black. The transformation was fast, violent, and utterly terrifying. Within seconds, the human girl who had been crying on the floor was gone. In her place stood a beast of impossible proportions. I was massive. Standard wolves came up to a human's waist. Even Caleb, in his alpha wolf form, was the size of a small horse. I was bigger. My shoulders were broad, packed with coiled, lethal muscle. My paws were the size of dinner plates, armed with claws that could shred steel. But it was the power radiating from me that paralyzed the room. It was a crushing, suffocating aura of absolute dominance that forced the air out of the lungs of every wolf in the hall. I shook out my silver-black coat and lifted my massive head. I opened my eyes. I couldn't see them myself, but I heard the terrified gasps of the pack. Later, Leo would tell me my eyes weren't the standard gold or amber of a werewolf. They were a glowing, ethereal violet, burning like twin dying stars. Let them see, my wolf growled in my mind. A savage, bloodthirsty purr. Let them see what they rejected. I let out a low, rumbling growl. It started deep in my chest and amplified until the crystal chandeliers above us rattled dangerously. In the crowd, wolves began to drop. It wasn't voluntary. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of my aura, the ancient bloodline that had just violently awakened, forced their instincts into submission. Dozens of wolves, including the elders, fell to their knees, exposing their necks in a display of absolute surrender to an apex predator they didn't understand. Caleb stood on the dais, his face pale, his jaw slack. He was fighting his own instincts, his alpha blood warring against the overwhelming compulsion to bow to me. Beside him, Victoria had collapsed entirely, sobbing hysterically as she pressed her face into the floorboards, completely dominated by the aura. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the dais. The wood groaned under my immense weight. "Guards!" Caleb yelled, though his voice cracked in panic. "Stop her!" The remaining guards hesitated. They looked at me, trembling, their eyes wide with sheer terror. None of them moved. To attack me would be suicide. Their wolves wouldn't allow it. I stepped up onto the first step of the dais, bringing my massive head level with Caleb's. He stumbled backward, putting himself between me and the cowering Victoria, though his hands were shaking violently. He shifted halfway, his eyes turning gold, his fangs descending, trying to project his own alpha aura to combat mine. It was like trying to stop a hurricane with a piece of cardboard. I didn't attack him. I didn't need to. I simply exhaled, a huff of hot, predatory breath that ruffled his perfectly styled hair and carried the scent of ozone and ancient earth. I stared into his terrified, regretful eyes. I saw the exact moment he realized what he had done. He hadn't just rejected a late bloomer. He had rejected a royal bloodline, something out of the myths our ancestors whispered around bonfires. Mine, the broken bond in my chest whispered, a pathetic, dying echo. "Never again," my wolf roared back. With a final, dismissive snort that conveyed more contempt than 1,000 words, I turned my back on the alpha of the silver pines. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, deliberately, down the center aisle of the pack hall. The crowd remained on their knees, heads bowed, parting for me in total silence. I reached the heavy oak double doors of the hall. With one swipe of my massive paw, the heavy iron latch shattered, and the doors burst open, splintering off their hinges. The cool, night air rushed in, carrying the scent of the deep forest and freedom. I leaped out into the darkness of the Oregon woods, my massive paws eating up the ground, leaving behind a ruined ceremony, a terrified pack, and an alpha who had just made the greatest, most devastating mistake of his life. The Mount Hood National Forest was a blur of emerald and shadow as I tore through the underbrush. The physical sensation was intoxicating. For 21 years, I had viewed the world through the dull, limited lens of human senses. Now, the forest was alive with a symphony of data. I could hear the panicked heartbeat of a snow hare 3 miles away. I could smell the damp, decomposing pine needles beneath my massive paws and the sharp, metallic tang of an incoming storm. My silver-black coat absorbed the moonlight, making me a ghost tearing through the ancient Douglas firs. The phantom pain of Caleb's rejection, the spiritual wound that should have killed me, was completely cauterized by the burning, dominant presence of my newly awakened wolf. She was a silent, lethal passenger in my mind, radiating a smug satisfaction. We hadn't just survived, we had conquered. But as the adrenaline began to level out, human logic crept back in. I couldn't stay a wolf forever. I had no territory, no protection, and I was entirely naked under this fur. I pushed my massive legs harder, altering my trajectory toward the western edge of the territory line. Leo and I had a contingency plan, a half-joking pact we had made a year ago when the bullying had gotten particularly bad. If it all goes to hell, meet at the abandoned Chevron station off Highway 26. It took me less than 20 minutes to cover a distance that would have taken an hour in a car. I burst through the tree line, my paws hitting the cracked, weed-choked asphalt of the old gas station. Sitting under the flickering, buzzing light of the solitary street lamp was a beat-up 2015 silver Ford F-150. The engine was idling. As I approached, the driver's side door creaked open. Leo stepped out, gripping a heavy tire iron in his right hand. He looked exhausted, his tuxedo jacket tossed aside, his bow tie undone. When he saw me step into the pool of yellow light, he dropped the tire iron. It hit the pavement with a sharp clank. He didn't see Madeline. He saw a monster out of a nightmare, a wolf standing nearly at his chest, radiating an aura that made his own Delta wolf whimper and submit. He fell to his knees on the oil-stained concrete, lowering his head. He is Pack. He is safe, I thought, fighting down my wolf's instinct to demand a verbal submission. Focusing on the memory of my human form, I let the shift take me. It was faster this time, pulling the bone and muscle back into the compact shape of a 21-year-old girl. I collapsed onto the asphalt, shivering violently in the cool Oregon night air. Leo was beside me in a second. He had the foresight to bring a heavy, flannel-lined Carhartt jacket from the cab of his truck, wrapping it around my bare shoulders and hoisting me to my feet. "Maddie," he breathed, his voice trembling as he bundled me into the passenger seat of the F-150. He cranked the heater to maximum and tossed me a lukewarm bottle of blue cherry Gatorade from the center console. "Maddie, what the hell was that?" You aren't a normal wolf." "I don't know," I rasped, taking a desperate gulp of the synthetic, sugary liquid. It tasted like heaven. I felt him sever the bond. I was dying, Leo. I could feel my heart stopping. And then she just woke up. Leo threw the truck into drive, peeling out of the Chevron station and merging onto the dark, winding stretch of Highway 26, heading away from Silver Pines. "You didn't just wake up, Maddie. You leveled the place. You didn't see what happened after you broke the doors down." I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window, watching the dark trees blur by. "Tell me." Leo's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "It was chaos. The aura you projected, it paralyzed everyone. Even the Alpha guards were puking from the pressure. But that wasn't the worst part." He swallowed hard, darting a glance in the rearview mirror as if expecting Caleb to be sprinting after the truck. "The shaman tried to finish the ceremony," Leo continued, his voice dropping to a hushed, terrified whisper. "Caleb was humiliated. He was screaming that you were an aberration, a rogue mutation. He grabbed Victoria, bit his own wrist to draw blood. and went to mark her neck to seal her as Luna. My stomach clenched. Even with the bond broken, the thought of him marking her stung, a phantom echo of 3 years of wasted devotion. And the moon goddess intervened, Leo said bluntly. The second his fangs broke Victoria's skin, the mating mark didn't take. It didn't glow gold, it turned pitch black, and it literally burned her, like acid. Victoria started screaming, thrashing on the dais. The shaman passed out cold. The elders went feral, demanding to know what Caleb had done. I stared at him, stunned. The mark rejected her? You can't reject a lichen bloodline without celestial consequences, Maddie, Leo said, looking at me with a mixture of awe and fear. That's what the elders were screaming. That silver coat, the violet eyes, that's not a Silver Pines wolf. That's firstborn blood, royal blood. Caleb didn't just reject a late-blooming mate. He threw away a living deity. The pack's magic is tied to the Alpha and Luna. Because he rejected you so unjustly, the goddess cursed his reign. The pack is already feeling it. The border wards dropped before I even got to my truck. The weight of his words settled over me like a lead blanket. I wasn't just a scorned ex-mate. I was a walking, breathing relic of power, and my rejection had fundamentally broken the Silver Pines pack. He's going to come for me, I whispered, the realization dawning with ice-cold clarity. He can't let me live. A living, rejected lichen mate is a threat to his entire claim to the Alpha title. If the neighboring packs find out he weakened Silver Pines by rejecting me, they'll slaughter him. Exactly, Leo agreed, pushing the Ford up to 80 miles an hour. Which is why we aren't stopping until we cross the state line. We're going to Washington. I know a guy in Bellingham. We need to disappear. The drive north was a grueling, tense blur of neon signs, driving rain, and the relentless hum of the tires on Interstate 5. By the time we crossed into Washington state, the storm had broken, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the highway into a slick, treacherous river. My wolf remained restless, pacing in the confines of my mind. She hated the truck. She hated the running. She wanted to turn back and rip Caleb's throat out for the insult he had dealt us. It took all my mental fortitude to keep her suppressed, focusing instead on the mundane reality of the soggy French fries we picked up from a late-night McDonald's drive-thru near Olympia. We finally pulled into Bellingham just as the sun began to threaten the horizon, casting a dismal gray light over the coastal city. Leo booked us into a rundown Super 8 motel off the exit, paying in cash. The room smelled heavily of bleach and old cigarette smoke, the floral bedspreads bearing suspicious, faded stains. It wasn't the pack house, but it was a fortress for the moment. I took a scalding hot shower, washing away the dirt of the forest and the lingering scent of Caleb's pack. When I stepped out, wrapped in a scratchy white towel, Leo was pacing the worn carpet, peering through a crack in the blackout curtains. "Something's wrong," he muttered, dropping the curtain and running a hand through his messy hair. "My wolf is on edge. We shouldn't have stopped." "Leo, we've been driving for 7 hours," I said, trying to sound soothing while my own instincts flared in agreement with his. "We need sleep. They don't know where we are." "Don't they?" Leo challenged. "Maddie, you're a lichen. Your scent isn't normal." If Caleb brought in professional trackers, before he could finish the sentence, the motel room door exploded inward. The heavy wood splintered, the deadbolt tearing out of the frame with a violent crunch. I screamed, dropping low to the ground as 4 massive men poured into the tiny room. They weren't wearing the standard woodland gear of Silver Pines. They were dressed in black tactical gear, armed with silver-laced batons, weapons designed to subdue, not kill. Leading the pack was Beta Sullivan, Victoria's father. He looked exhausted, his expensive suit rumpled, but his eyes burned with a manic, desperate fury. "You really thought a Delta and a freak could outrun a sanctioned alpha hunt?" Sullivan snarled, kicking a chair out of his way. "Grab the boy. Put the silver cuffs on the girl. Caleb wants her back alive to face a pack tribunal." "A tribunal?" I spat, the fear evaporating as my wolf surged to the forefront, my eyes flashing violet in the dim motel light. "He rejected me. I owe him nothing. You broke our pack," Sullivan roared, lunging forward. "My daughter is scarred for life, because of your cursed blood. You're coming back to fix the wards, and then the Alpha will decide how to dispose of you." 2 enforcers rushed Leo, slamming him against the drywall. Leo fought back, shifting his arms to grow claws, but a heavy blow from a silver baton dropped him to his knees, gasping in agony. That was the breaking point. The heat exploded in my chest. I didn't care about the tight space. I didn't care about the collateral damage. I let the lichen out. The transformation was instantaneous. A violent explosion of silver-black fur and rippling muscle that shattered the flimsy bedside table and cracked the ceiling plaster. I roared, a sound that deafened the enforcers and shattered the motel room's single window. Sullivan stumbled back, pulling a heavy, silver-loaded revolver from his jacket. He didn't get to aim it. Before I could tear his throat out, the atmosphere in the room shifted so violently that it felt like the air pressure had dropped to zero. A new scent flooded the destroyed motel room, a scent so powerful, so intoxicatingly dark, that it stopped my lichen dead in her tracks. It smelled of ozone, dark roast espresso, and the sharp, clean bite of winter ice. Mine, my wolf purred, the rage instantly dissolving into a possessive, trembling submission. A figure stepped through the ruined doorway, stepping over the splintered wood as if he were taking a casual stroll through a park. He was taller than Caleb, broader, radiating an authority that made the Silver Pines Alpha look like a petulant child playing dress-up. He wore a tailored charcoal gray trench coat over a black suit, his dark hair flawlessly styled despite the rain outside. His eyes were a terrifying glowing crimson. This wasn't an alpha. This was a king. Beta Sullivan of Silver Pines. The man spoke. His voice was a smooth, deadly baritone that commanded the space effortlessly. You are 300 miles outside your jurisdiction, bleeding on the carpet of my city, and pointing a gun at a woman in a towel. Sullivan was shaking. He lowered the gun, his eyes wide with terror. Gideon Croft. We didn't mean to encroach on the Obsidian Syndicate's territory. We are simply retrieving a rogue pack member on orders of our Alpha, Gideon Croft, the rumored leader of the Northern Syndicate, a ruthless conglomerate of wolves who controlled the entire Pacific Northwest port system. He was a modern warlord, a lichen who answered to no pack laws. Gideon didn't look at Sullivan. His crimson eyes drifted past the beta, locking onto my massive, silver-black wolf form. The moment our eyes met, a shockwave of electricity shot down my spine. This wasn't the weak, one-sided spark I had felt with Caleb. This was a supernatural collision. It felt like two halves of a dying star slamming into each other. The bond snapped into place with an audible, ringing crack in my mind, absolute and unbreakable. Gideon tilted his head, a slow, predatory smirk touching his lips. A rogue pack member? He repeated softly, his eyes never leaving mine. I think you are mistaken, Sullivan. Gideon took a step forward, and the three enforcers instantly dropped to their knees, physically forced down by the oppressive weight of his lichen aura. She isn't a rogue, Gideon declared, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with an ancient, terrifying possessiveness. She is my mate, and if you or your pathetic alpha ever look in her direction again, I will personally burn Silver Pines to the ground and salt the earth it stood on. The silence in the ruined Super 8 motel room was absolute. Beta Sullivan and his enforcers remained pressed against the cheap carpet, their bodies trembling under the crushing, suffocating weight of Gideon Croft's lichen aura. I stood frozen in the center of the room, still wrapped in a scratchy white towel, staring into the glowing crimson eyes of the man who had just claimed me as his mate. The terrifying, blinding rage that had triggered my shift only moments ago evaporated, replaced by a profound, humming warmth that settled deep in my bones. The bond I had felt with Caleb for 3 years had been a flickering candle. This was a roaring forest fire. Gideon didn't demand I shift or kneel. He simply took off his tailored charcoal trench coat and stepped forward, draping the heavy, incredibly warm fabric over my shoulders. The scent of ozone, dark espresso, and winter ice enveloped me, instantly calming the frantic pacing of my inner wolf. Get your Delta, Gideon said softly, his eyes never leaving mine. My medical team is waiting in the SUVs outside. We are leaving. I nodded, my voice catching in my throat. I rushed to Leo, who was groaning on the floor, clutching his bruised ribs. 2 massive men in tailored black suits materialized from the hallway, gently but efficiently hoisting Leo to his feet and guiding us out into the rain. I didn't look back at Sullivan. We left Bellingham in a convoy of armored black Cadillac Escalades, tearing southward through the driving rain toward Seattle. I sat in the spacious leather back seat of the lead vehicle, wrapped in Gideon's coat, watching the city lights blur past. Gideon sat across from me, pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He offered it to me silently. I took it, the whiskey burning a welcome trail of heat down my throat. You're the Obsidian Syndicate, I finally whispered, the reality of my situation settling in. You control the northwest ports, the shipping lines, the packless wolves. We prefer the term independent enterprise, Madeline, Gideon replied, a faint, sharp smile playing on his lips. And yes, we operate outside the antiquated hierarchy of the forest packs. We deal in real estate, logistics, and intelligence. Which is how I know exactly why Caleb Harrington was stupid enough to reject a firstborn lichen. I frowned, the phantom ache of the rejection flaring briefly. He rejected me because I was unawakened. Because he wanted Victoria's strength. Gideon let out a dark, humorless chuckle. Madeline, the Silver Pines pack is a rustic relic. They don't understand modern economics. For the last 5 years, Caleb's father heavily invested pack funds into a disastrous commercial real estate venture down in Portland. A shell company called Apex Holdings bought up their debt. Silver Pines is bankrupt. They have been facing foreclosure on their own ancestral lands. I stared at him, the glass of whiskey slipping in my grip. Bankrupt? But the mating gala, the champagne, the chandeliers. A facade, Gideon said smoothly, pulling a sleek iPad from the seat pocket and sliding it across the console to me. The screen displayed a series of banking wire transfers and foreclosures. Caleb didn't choose Victoria Sinclair for her strength. He chose her because Beta Sullivan embezzled millions from a private tech firm in Bellevue. Sullivan offered to pay off the pack's debt to Apex Holdings, but only if his daughter was made Luna. Your rejection wasn't an act of divine fate or pack preservation. It was a corporate buyout. The words hit me harder than Caleb's public rejection. My heartbreak, my 3 years of quiet suffering, the agonizing spiritual severing on the dais, it wasn't about the moon goddess. It wasn't about me being weak. I had been sold out to cover a bad mortgage. The sheer, banal reality of it made my blood boil. It wasn't supernatural politics. It was greed. And now? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper as my violet eyes flared in the reflection of the tinted window. Now, Gideon said, leaning forward, the raw power of his lichen alpha bleeding into his tone. Caleb's little financial transaction has doomed him. By rejecting a firstborn, he shattered the magical wards protecting the Silver Pines territory. Rogue factions are already crossing their borders. His people are panicking, and Caleb has requested an emergency parley with the syndicate to beg for our military support. Gideon reached out, his large, warm hand gently brushing a damp strand of hair from my face. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. He thinks he's meeting a warlord to negotiate a loan. He doesn't know he's going to answer to his queen. Rest tonight, little wolf. Tomorrow we take back what you are owed. The parley was set for midnight at an abandoned shipping yard in Tacoma. A sprawling maze of rusted steel containers and cracked concrete, battered by a relentless, freezing wind coming off Commencement Bay. It was neutral ground, isolated and steeped in the scent of salt and decaying industry. I stepped out of the armored Escalade, the gravel crunching beneath my combat boots. I wasn't wearing a fragile evening gown tonight. I wore dark tactical pants, a fitted black turtleneck, and a heavy leather jacket. My silver-black wolf paced just beneath my skin, a coiled spring of lethal energy, eager for the blood of the man who had sold us out. Gideon walked flawlessly beside me, a silent, terrifying shadow in his charcoal coat, flanked by 50 of the syndicate's most elite lichen enforcers. They moved with absolute, terrifying precision, fanning out to secure the perimeter. Leo, his ribs securely wrapped and his spirit restored by the syndicate's medics, walked at my left flank, a silver-laced baton gripping tightly in his hand. Caleb was waiting in the center of the yard, illuminated by the harsh, buzzing glare of a portable halogen work light. He looked nothing like the arrogant, polished alpha who had stood on the dais 2 nights ago. His suit was wrinkled, his posture slumped, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of pure desperation. Victoria stood slightly behind him, clutching her fur coat tightly around her neck, shivering in the coastal wind. A dozen Silver Pines elders stood behind them, looking terrified and deeply uncomfortable in the urban setting. As we approached the circle of light, Caleb stepped forward, forcing his chest out to project an authority he no longer possessed. Gideon Croft, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Silver Pines is prepared to offer you exclusive shipping rights through our southern logging roads in exchange for... Caleb's voice abruptly died in his throat. His eyes, frantic and bloodshot, locked onto me. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Victoria gasped, taking a stumbling step backward, her hand flying to her mouth. The elders erupted into hushed, panicked whispers. their eyes wide as they recognized the violet hum of power radiating from me. "Madeline?" Caleb choked out, his voice cracking. He looked from me to Gideon, his mind violently struggling to process the reality in front of him. What is this? Why is the rogue here?" "Careful with your words, Harrington," Gideon murmured, his voice a lethal silken thread that carried over the howling wind. "You are addressing my mate, and the true sovereign of this territory." Caleb flinched as if struck. "Your mate? No, that's impossible. She's a wolfless runt. She has no bloodline. She is a firstborn, one of the Silver Pines elders." A gray-haired man named Harrison interrupted, stepping forward with trembling hands. "Look at her eyes, Alpha. We felt the wards shatter the moment you rejected her. You expelled a lichen. You cursed us." "Shut up," Caleb roared, his eyes flashing a desperate, unstable gold. He turned back to Gideon. "This is a trick. You harbor a fugitive who assaulted my pack. I demand you hand her over under the Treaty of the Northwest Councils." I let out a low, mocking laugh. The sound was entirely devoid of warmth, echoing off the steel shipping containers. I stepped forward, leaving Gideon's side, walking directly into Caleb's personal space. The sheer, oppressive weight of my lichen aura slammed into him, forcing his knees to buckle slightly. "There are no councils here, Caleb," I said, my voice eerily calm. "There is only the reality of what you did. You didn't reject me because of the moon goddess. You rejected me to cover a bad mortgage." Caleb's jaw dropped. The elders behind him froze. "That's right," I raised my voice, ensuring every wolf in the yard heard me. "Your Alpha bankrupted Silver Pines investing in commercial real estate with Apex Holdings. He was going to lose the ancestral lands to foreclosure. So, he struck a deal with Beta Sullivan. Sullivan used embezzled funds to pay off the debt, and in exchange, Caleb made Victoria his Luna. It wasn't a spiritual severing. It was a business transaction, and you sold your pack's soul to do it." "Lies," Victoria shrieked from the back, though her voice trembled violently. "She's a jealous freak." "Is it?" Gideon asked smoothly, holding up a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto the wet concrete at the elder's feet. Bank records, wire transfers. The deed to the Silver Pines pack house, currently held in escrow by a shell company owned by Beta Sullivan. Your Alpha sold your home, and then he sold his true mate to cover his tracks. Elder Harrison picked up the folder, his eyes scanning the documents in the harsh halogen light. A deep collective growl began to rumble among the elders. They turned their furious glares toward Caleb. "Caleb," Harrison growled, his fangs descending. "Is this true? You mortgaged the forest?" Caleb looked completely trapped. The illusion of his noble leadership was shattering in real time. He looked at Victoria, seeking support, but Victoria was already backing away. The moment she realized the money trail had been exposed, her survival instincts kicked in. "I didn't know!" Victoria cried out, throwing her hands up and backing toward the perimeter. "My father did the banking. Caleb lied to me too. I rescind my claim. I rescind it." She turned and actually bolted into the darkness of the shipping yard, abandoning the man she had conspired with. The betrayal was the final, fatal blow to Caleb's sanity. With a horrifying, guttural roar, the last remnants of his human restraint snapped. He didn't shift fully. He let the chaotic, half-shifted rage take over, his claws extending, his face contorting into a monstrous lupine mask. "If I kill you, the bond is erased," Caleb screamed, lunging directly at me, his jaws snapping for my throat. Gideon didn't move to intercept. He knew I didn't need him to. I didn't flinch. I let the lichen out. I didn't bother with the half-shift. In a fraction of a second, the human girl vanished, and the massive silver-black monster erupted onto the concrete. The shockwave of my transformation shattered the halogen light bulb, plunging the center of the yard into shadows lit only by the glowing, violent violet of my eyes. Caleb slammed into me, but it was like a feral dog hitting a brick wall. I didn't even budge. I reached out with a massive clawed paw and swatted him out of the air. The impact sent him flying 20 feet, crashing violently into the corrugated steel of a shipping container. He slumped to the ground, coughing up blood, but he tried to force himself back up, his eyes wide with a manic, suicidal frenzy. "Enough," my wolf commanded in my mind. I stalked forward, the concrete cracking beneath my immense weight. I placed one massive paw flat against Caleb's chest, pinning him to the wet gravel. He struggled, thrashing wildly, but he couldn't move an inch. I lowered my massive, silver-furred head until my snout was inches from his face. I didn't bite him. I opened my jaws and unleashed the alpha roar. It wasn't a physical sound. It was a devastating, magical frequency that resonated directly into the marrow of his bones. It was the ancient rite of the firstborn, the rite of severance. I pushed my aura into his chest, locating the glowing golden spark of his alpha status, the very magic that connected him to the Silver Pines pack. And with a brutal, spiritual flex, I crushed it. Caleb let out an agonizing, soul-tearing scream that dwarfed the sound I had made on the dais 2 nights ago. The golden light in his eyes flared violently, and then, like a blown fuse, it died entirely, replaced by a dull, lifeless brown. His muscles shrank, his fangs retracted. I stepped back, letting the shift recede, pulling my human form back together as I stood over him. He lay on the ground, weeping, stripped of his title, his strength, and his magic. I had reduced the alpha of Silver Pines to a broken omega. The Silver Pines elders, witnessing the ancient rite, fell to their knees in the wet gravel, exposing their necks to me in total submission. "Luna," Elder Harrison wept. "Alpha, please, forgive us. Return to the forest. The pack is yours." I looked down at them, then at the pathetic, sobbing form of Caleb Harrington. "Silver Pines is not my home anymore," I said, my voice echoing in the cold night. "Rebuild your pack. Elect a new leader. The Obsidian Syndicate will clear your debts and protect your borders from the... But you belong to us now. You answer to Seattle." I turned away from the ruins of my past, walking back toward the armored SUVs. Gideon was waiting, his crimson eyes glowing with absolute pride and deep, unrestrained adoration. He wrapped his coat around me once more, pulling me flush against his chest, kissing the crown of my head. "Ready to go home, Queen?" he murmured. "Take me home," I replied, and for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. 3 months later, the damp, rustic scent of the Oregon woods was nothing but a distant memory. I stood on the sweeping glass balcony of the Syndicate's headquarters, watching the Seattle skyline glittering against the dark waters of Puget Sound. I wasn't the pitiful, wolfless runt of Silver Pines anymore. I was Madeline Croft, the firstborn lichen queen of the Pacific Northwest. Silver Pines had stabilized under Elder Harrison's new leadership, strictly monitored by Leo, who had enthusiastically taken the role of our southern enforcer. As for Caleb, he had vanished into the human world, a wolfless shadow working off his debts. Gideon stepped onto the balcony, wrapping his strong arms around my waist from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. His scent of ozone and ice grounded me, a constant, unbreakable tether. We had built an empire not on deceit and hollow traditions, but on absolute loyalty and a love that burned brighter than a dying star. I had been rejected by a boy playing dress-up, only to awaken a god and claim a king.